So we're here in Nanaimo with Paul Manley,
Yes.
the candidate for the Green Party. And we have invited all candidates,
Uh-huh.
NDPs, conservatives, liberals, and libertarians. And you're the only one who showed up.
Okay.
So let's carry on with the questions. And
Sure.
fairness to you and your party. You read the questions before, and
I did,
the
yes.
first question is about free trade agreements.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, are they beneficial or detrimental for the majority of the population in Canada?
Our current model of free trade agreements all have what's called investor-state dispute settlements in them, and those are parts of free trade agreements that the Green Party doesn't agree with. We believe in trade that is fair, that includes labor rights, environmental standards, and good social policy attached to it, but our current model of trade agreements with investor-state in them give corporations power over our democratically elected governments and allow them to subvert our democracy and undermine our sovereignty.
Okay, so I understand you're saying that you don't like some aspects of
Yeah.
the free trade agreements, but there are aspects that you do like about free trade agreements?
Well, I think the trade in general is not a bad thing. We don't disagree with trade. I enjoy coffee in the morning. We can't grow coffee here in
That's right.
British Columbia.
Yeah.
So there are aspects of trade that I appreciate and
Sure.
I think are good for the world. It's also a way of working with people around the world. But
Right.
I think the current model of globalization and trade has gone too far, where we're extracting raw resources and sending them off to places where there's no labor standards or no environmental standards, and we're exploiting other people to get cheap goods back.
Right. Now, the opponents to free trade,
Yeah.
they say free trade agreements have nothing to do with trade. So they're not really
Yeah.
about trade, because trade has existed before the free trade agreements
Yes, indeed.
came into effect. So
Yeah.
do you oppose the fact that we have free trade agreements and we're negotiating for more?
Yeah, I don't like the investor-state part of trade agreements, and I don't like what's being attached to trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've seen leaked documents about them wanting to eliminate limits on raw log exports, for example.
Right. I don't know if you remember David Orchard.
Yes, I do.
He was advocating for the abrogation of free trade agreements. Would you go as far as to agree with him?
We would want to renegotiate parts of NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, to get rid of things like investor-state, which give corporations rights over democratic governments.
Right,
Yeah.
right. In 1988 was the big debate between the liberals and the conservatives with John Turner.
Yeah.
And the next election, I talked to a few politicians, and that's precisely what they told me. We have to renegotiate. We
Yes.
have to review. We have to. That's what the liberals are doing. That's what the NDPs are doing. And are you saying that you would be doing the same thing?
Yes, I'm saying we should renegotiate NAFTA and get rid of things like the investor-state Chapter 11 and get rid of things like the proportionality clause.
That's right.
Well, it is a divisive issue. I think it sounds good on the surface, and there is an enhanced economy that comes through the free trade agreements. But what I would support, is what the Green Party supports, is more fair trade agreements. The free trade agreements that we've got, there's sort of two negatives associated with them. I think it doesn't put the sovereignty of our own country, the environment, and human rights at the forefront. It puts simply trade at the forefront, and that's not right. We need to ensure that our own living conditions, our own sovereignty are protected, as well as the countries that we're dealing with. The other negative with the free trade agreements that we've seen ever since NAFTA is the provision of investor-state dispute settlements, or FIPAs. And that's where the real danger lies. That's where we do put our own sovereignty and our own ability to make laws and protect our environment in jeopardy. We've already seen Canada's been at the losing end of several lawsuits. We've been sued several times behind door tribunals, and that's not okay. So starting with NAFTA, and now the agreements are just getting bigger and bigger. So I think that the potential damage is getting that much bigger. with the TPP being negotiated again behind closed doors, we don't even know what Canada is getting committed to, and that's not okay. So we would advocate for sure to make the negotiations public for future agreements, and for the existing agreements, as long as we have to put up with them, we would advocate that all disputes be made public so that the public is aware of the repercussions of the free trade agreements that we have in place.
There was a group 20 years ago or so that were advocating for the abrogation of free trade agreements. Would you go that far?
Well, certainly the free trade agreements that contain the investor-state dispute clauses, that and it seems they all do now. So as long as those are apart, yes, I would agree that we should no longer have the free trade agreements as they currently stand.
Yeah. So how would you tackle that if you're elected as an MP? Would you present private members' bills saying we must abrogate FTA and NAFTA and all the other trade agreements?
Well, sadly, they're not laws. Laws are easily changed. The free trade agreements are agreements, so they're contracts that we don't have the luxury of just ripping them up. NAFTA has a 6-month exit. So what we would advocate, what I would propose, is that we would immediately put in our 6-month notice to remove ourselves from NAFTA. The other agreements, FIPA, the Canada-China FIPA agreement, which isn't even a free trade agreement, it is simply a investor protection agreement. That one, we're currently on the books for the next 30 years, 32 years.
In 1935, the Bank of Canada Act was passed by our Parliament, creating the Bank of Canada, a bank owned by the Canadian people. From 1935 till 1974, this bank was used by Parliament at virtually no cost and virtually no inflation to get us through World War II, to create the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway, to finance the Canadian Pension Plan, EI, and National Health, along with many other fantastic infrastructure programs and social programs. However, in 1974, everything changed. The Bank of International Settlements was caused, for reasons we won't go into now, and they came to Canada and basically said, we want you to join, but you have to join under our terms, which meant no longer using the Bank of Canada to finance Canada. Well, back in 1975, our national debt was $22.6 billion. Not very much, and owed to ourselves. Today, our national debt stands at just about $1 trillion. And your share of that, according to the nationaldebtclots.org, today stands at $29,904, and we're now on the 9th of September. So my question to you is this. Are you willing to let this situation, this national debt and this personal debt exist? Or are you willing to tell your constituents that you will fight on their behalf to reinstate the Bank of Canada as a financial supplier for the country of Canada and get rid of the national debt and their share of it? Which will it be?
The Green Party policy around that is that we should review the possibility of using the Bank of Canada for infrastructure loans. And I'm not an economist, so there's lots of things I don't know about the Bank of Canada and how that would work, but I've talked to different economists about it who have told me about pros and cons to doing this kind of using the Bank of Canada. And some economists are saying that it would cause inflation, and others have said that we could have long-term non-transferable bonds that could be used for raising funds to use with the Bank of Canada. So I don't know the ins and outs of those things.
If in fact it's legal, that it was mandated that the Bank of Canada lend this capital to provinces and to municipalities, would you advocate for that to be practiced? Because apparently the law is there, it's just that it's not practiced.
Yes, I think what I understand about this is that since the Bank of Canada hasn't been used, that conventions, international conventions have been changed. like I said, I'm not an economist, so I don't understand the Basel Convention, but I've just heard that that is something that would impact this and international bond markets, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something that we would look at, that we would research and try to figure out what would work. And I'm actually watching the Comer case with great interest to see how that works out.
That's right. Rocco Gagliati in Toronto, he's suing the government actually for not complying with this mandate.
Yeah.
The bare minimum that I would do is advocate for research. We need to look behind the curtain of what happened. So the Bank of Canada, when it was instituted, it was there to provide interest-free loans for infrastructure projects to within Canada at the national and provincial level. That seemed to work very well after World Wars I and II. There were big projects, big national projects that occurred through that financing. Our debt went up quickly, but plateaued at $40 billion for the longest time. And it wasn't until the early 70s that we moved away from using our Bank of Canada and went to global private banks that we've seen our national debt skyrocket. I think right now 90% of our debt is due to accumulated interest. So interest on our debt, which amounts to $93 million a day we're currently paying, $29 billion a year, is a huge issue. And I honestly don't understand enough about this issue. I don't understand why it isn't in our media on a daily basis. It's one of the, I don't know, it seems to me it's one of the biggest national topics that we should be dealing with. It is an elephant in the room. Why are we not? The case that you mentioned, the Comer case, the lawyer involved.
Rocco Gagliati.
Yes, Rocco is our Canada's preeminent constitutional lawyer. Every case that he tries, every case that he's involved with is coast-to-coast news, yet this one, not so much. And it just leads one to wonder why. So I'm personally intrigued with the story and am curious to know what my powers as an MP would be in order to bring this forward.
And you would look into it?
Yes, I would, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that may very well be the first private member's bill that I take forward.
All right. Anyway, let's go to the next question, which is what should Canada do about UN Resolution 194, which is about Palestinians' right of return?
Right. So this is a resolution that dates back to 1948. And Canada originally supported this resolution.
And Israel too.
Yes. And so I think that this is a question for, Canada's role in this is to be a diplomatic power, to go in and to not take sides with either side, but to work towards peace and justice in the Middle East, and to be an honest broker, and to work towards the goal of bringing both sides to the table and letting them work this out and negotiate it in a proper diplomatic manner. And I think what we've seen with our current governments and some leaders is that they've taken sides, and I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I think that we need to have a balanced approach and go back to our position as an honest broker for peace and justice and work towards solutions. And it's up to the people, both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, to figure out how that's going to work out and how they're going to do that.
Some people are talking about boycotting Israel to pressure them to abide by Resolution 194.
Yeah.
Would the Green Party support that?
I don't think that we're not opposed to boycotts, but it's not something that we openly are engaged in, the BDS movement, no.
Okay.
That's an older resolution.
1948.
1948, yes. And the nature of it, which if I could summarize, I hope I summarize it properly, is looking for a peaceful resolution which recognizes a state for Palestine as well as Israel. We advocate for just that. I think that we should look to the borders of pre-1967. I support both Palestine and an Israeli state. I think that Canada's role should be one that is non-violent. We should be doing the best we can to help facilitate simply negotiations. We shouldn't side with either state with military support in any way. I think ours should be a role of trying to bridge that gap, and I don't want to say if possible because that sounds negative, but we need to do whatever we can to bring peace to that area. It's had unrest for such a long time. One could feel that it's a desperate situation, but hopefully it's not. Hopefully peace can come to that area.
Resolution 194 is specifically mandating Israel to accept Palestinians to return, and Israel signed that resolution. So they obviously have been in violation of that resolution for 67 years. Would Canada be willing to do what we did with South Africa when they were applying apartheid to blacks in Africa? Canada and many other world countries boycotted products. Do you think that Canada should be doing the same thing in this case with Israel to pressure the government to allow Palestinians to return as mandated?
Yeah, well, certainly in general, Canada has supported boycotts in the past. I think that that's not the first line of defense that we should use, but certainly that I would advocate a boycott over, certainly over military support in any way. So to boycott and apply economic pressure, if that's what it's required, if negotiation and our own ability to mediate isn't enough, then yes, I suppose the next step I would support boycotts, yes.
Okay.
This country has virtually abandoned peacekeeping, peace building of any kind. If you look in the federal directory now, you'll find no reference virtually to peace building of any kind. There used to be a peace building secretariat. There, as far as I know, none or very few funds devoted in any way to peace building. Rather, we have become a belligerent on the world stage, an aggressive nation favoring combat over peace building. That's true both in the Middle East. It's true in terms of our combat against ISIS and the bogus threat that they're about to become on our doorstep. We have the initiative for a Canadian Department of Peace. Internationally, we need to recover. You know, at one time, as you know, in the United Nations, there was a group of non-aligned nations. That is where we belong, in the non-aligned nations, so that we can use our offices, our good offices, to pursue issues of peace, nonviolence. What are our alternatives here? What are our nonviolent alternatives to combat? What are our 6 planes doing but wreaking havoc in the Middle East? 6 planes in a huge operation there. That's what we're doing. 6 planes dropping bombs. And civilians are by far the vast majority of casualties in conflict. So the Department of Peace idea, we think, is a major shift in cabinet and in the society, because what it means is we are beginning to establish peace as an operational principle of our society. Respond to the simple question, do you support a Department of Peace in Canada?
Yes, I would support that. And Elizabeth May and Bruce Heyer both supported Alex Adamanyanko's bill. The foundation, one of the founding principles of the Green Party is nonviolence. And so we believe that we need to work towards peace and security nonviolently in the world. And you know, doing regime change from 5,000 feet with F-16 fighters and bombs is not the way to create peace in the world. And Canada should sign on to the arms trade treaty and stop selling arms around the world and work towards ending the arms trade, because this is part of what is exacerbating the problems in the world. And like I was saying previously, we should be moving back to our position as an honest broker for peace and security, and diplomatically working with warring factions to work towards peaceful solutions.
Would you advocate for shifting some of the budget to defense and to a peace ministry?
I would advocate to have some budget for peace ministry. Yeah, and I think, you know, we have a history of being peacekeepers in this country and working towards social justice around the world, and I would advocate for continuing that work.
Yes, I think it's an intriguing idea. It was brought forward, I think, in the last sitting by the NDP, and I'd like to think that we don't need a separate Ministry of Peace through our existing Ministry of Defense and International Affairs. I would like to think that everything that Canada is doing on the global scene is towards bringing peace. Our role, traditional role as peacekeepers, was held in high regard around the world. We've drifted too far from that, and we've become, you know, by definition, a warrior nation. We are too quick to be involved and participating in wars, and we've lost sight of I think we've lost sight of our mandate as world peacekeepers. So maybe a separate Ministry of Peace, is what's required to give enough extra attention and to help steer that ship back in the correct direction. It shouldn't be needed, but the fact that it has come up, I think it's an intriguing idea, and yes, I would support it.
You would support it.
Yes.
Good. Now, the fifth question: should citizens participate in policy legislation by initiative and plebiscite? Now, the BC government legislated in 1996 the right of citizens to propose initiatives. I don't know if you remember Ujjal Dosanjh bring initiative and recall.
Yes.
We're not talking about recall, but specifically initiative. However, the NDPs made this the requirements to introduce initiative so onerous, so difficult, that no initiative has ever been succeeded for the past 19 years. Now, I presume that Canada Elections has the technology and the resources to set up a website registry for political initiatives. So people can go on this website and put their initiatives. They can also tabulate those initiatives for popularity. And it could be considered a non-binding plebiscite. The question to you, as if elected, would you advocate for legislating initiative and plebiscite?
Yes, I would, yeah. I'm completely supportive of participatory democracy. It's one of the foundations of the Green Party. I think it's one of the areas that Canada has slipped. We're losing our democracy. I believe that as an MP, I support the only description of the job of an MP, which is the one line in the Constitution that says that an MP's responsibility is to represent the needs of its constituents. So how does one determine the needs of the constituents? My riding is physically huge. Courtenay, Alberni is spread all over 110,000 people. How is it that in reality, how am I to get my thumb on the pulse of that many people? I think that technology would be a fantastic way to do that. Prior to that, if I could just segue for a moment, I think that the face-to-face town halls are one way of doing that. I've really enjoyed that through the campaign process. I've done an awful lot of town halls. It's a great way to interact with everyone. But it's getting a small sample. And it's a corny line, but they say democracy is done by those who show up. And I'm seeing that in practice. So if there is a way of touching more people, and obviously technology would be the way to do it, I'm surprised that doesn't already exist, that those tools aren't readily available to us. If they are, I'm unaware of it. I've looked. We do so many other things. I mean, you and I do our banking online. There's so much that technology is able to automate for us and do it in a safe way that I can understand why we don't have plebiscites available at our disposal. I would like to be able to have that as one of the tools that I have in order to determine how to help represent this riding.
That's right, to know what people want.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. The question is, if elected, would you advocate for the legislation of initiative and plebiscite?
Yes, I would. And one of the other principles and values of the Green Party is participatory democracy. So we support these kind of initiatives. We think that, personally, I think that they need to be, the system needs to be fair. You need to have rules around how much money people can pour into these things, and you have to make sure that citizens have access to be educated about the issues so they understand what it is that they're voting on. And but I definitely support that idea, and I know that I've talked to some technology companies that are working on this type of technology now, so that you can go in and vote, and you can't vote from the same IP, and that you get special pins, etc., to make sure that every citizen just gets one vote in a plebiscite or online referendum. And when we have that kind of system in place, it's a good way to either non-binding or binding, depending on the question, to gauge what the public support is for legislation or for changing the direction of the country or the government.
Right. You think that that citizens should have the right to have a plebiscite on our affiliation with NATO?
On our affiliation with NATO?
Yeah. I'm not saying what is your opinion about it. I'm just saying, do you think citizens should have the right to participate in a plebiscite about our affiliation?
If we had a plebiscite on our participation in NATO, then citizens should have the right to participate in it.
You would
sure.
support that?
I would support, if there's a plebiscite, that people should have the right to take part in the plebiscite.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Now, would you support the plebiscite, non-binding plebiscite, just to know what people think about our affiliation with NATO?
Yes. If I'm in favor of it, if I'm in favor of a plebiscite, I'm not sure off the top of my head if there's a topic that I don't think we should use one for. I think if it's good for getting the pulse of the area, then yes, our role with NATO would be, like anything else, a very good way to
question
determine
to the
that.
people.
Yeah.
Great.
And specifically to that topic, it is something that back to the people town halls that I've been doing, our role with NATO does come up, and that is something that I don't think I could tell you right now what the consensus is in my riding. I've had comments across the spectrum on that, so yeah, that could be a very good use of that tool.
Would be interesting to know.
It would be very interesting to know,
because
yes.
one of the critics of NATO say that's why the immigrants are running away from the Middle East, because we're affiliated with NATO and we go and bomb all the countries there, and that creates the immigrants to come out and try to go to Europe. So anyway, I wish you luck in your riding, and thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. Bye-bye.
All right.